Barbary pirates abducted 109 people from the southwest coast of Ireland in 1631. Their captives arrived at a strange and exotic land. The suffering of men in particular was often so much worse, possibly a life literally chained on a corsair ship, and sometimes forced to row until death. For women or young girls, any form of sex slavery or forced marriages were distinct possibilities. Why then, years later, when opportunities presented themselves, did many choose not to come home? Slaves on the Barbary coast generally comprised two distinct groups, public and private. Out of the 109 Baltimore abductees, there are only 3 on record that left Algiers. In spite of the many horror stories, the fate of privately owned slaves assigned to families could sometimes be better. There were occasional accounts of really good relationships between masters and slaves, with some leading to sincere friendships and even arranged marriages. Notwithstanding the trauma of being ripped from the arms of their families, the more fortunate children did experience genuine familial love in their new environments. So, for many, life simply moved on. There were new relationships and children. The memory of Baltimore life for child abductees would have been very distant, if there at all. A lot of women may have been forced into having relationships, but in the puritanical society of the 1600s back in Ireland, how could they realistically have gone back? A concubine would hardly have been welcomed home. So who were these people, and what had they left behind in Baltimore?
The community was made up mostly of English Protestant settlers who had moved in over the course of the previous few decades. It was quite a young community with lots of children, so the vast majority of people actually who were captured were women and children. They worked in fisheries primarily and farming in the local area. The town itself was divided to some extent, so the people living down at the coastal region who were the ones who were captured for the most part would have been from the poorer sections and more directly connected with the fishing trade. That part of town smelt bad, it was more exposed. Further up the hill you would have had slightly better off individuals.
So why was piracy so common at this time? What were the factors that led it to being such a dominant activity?
So the golden age of piracy is a little later in the 18th century, but this is really the beginnings of the kind of global network of maritime trade organised by the Spanish, the Portuguese, the Dutch, and eventually the English and French as well. So for the first time you really have significant convoys of shipping crossing the oceans in fairly exposed positions, and one of the consequences of that is that you get instead of simply local coastal piracy around the Mediterranean or indeed around the Irish coastline or English coastline, we're getting ocean-going ships run by pirates who are expert at navigating on the ocean, and so they have much greater range, they're harder to catch in the open seas, and so really this is like the modern arms trade. You develop new technology and use it for your own benefit, but it gets into the wrong hands.
So we often think of England, France, Spain as countries that are pretty large, relatively speaking, at the time, with lots of assets at their disposal. How come this was able to occur under their watch?
So in general, control over the seas was very limited in this period. The resources simply aren't there to police the sea in any serious way. especially along the Barbary coast, which is technically at this point part of the Ottoman Empire, but it's one of the most remote regions of the Ottoman Empire, and so it's convenient for the Ottomans to let cities develop a lot of independence and to thrive on piracy, which helped to undermine the Ottomans' enemies.
So, is this the only known raid on the Irish coastline at the time?
In Ireland, yes, it's the only documented one. It was increasingly common in the wider area, so along the French coast and even as far north as Iceland 2 years prior to this. And actually, it's relatively small and one might say unsuccessful in the sense that capturing around 100 inhabitants is small compared to, for example, raids in Italy that take 400, or in Spain that take even 800 and beyond.
So, what about family history and clans? It is almost impossible to discuss the history of Baltimore without referencing the O'Driscoll family. Multiple family crests depict their connections with the sea. Renowned mariners and landowners from Baltimore, they dominated the seas around the southwest coast of Ireland, which had some of the richest fishing grounds in Europe. They built castles and harbours, and in the century before the 1641 raid were one of the strongest clans in Ireland. So powerful and connected were they that in 1450, King Henry VI decreed that no person of Waterford or Wexford should fish in the O'Driscoll territory. The name Baltimore is an anglicised version of Baile an Tíbhór, town of the big house. The Gaelic name given to Baltimore is actually Dún na Siad. Its English meaning will be explained shortly. This was the O'Driscoll Castle, which was used as a centre of administration for trading activities as well as for lavish gatherings. A well-documented feast in 1413 was said to be one of the earliest written records of people dancing in Ireland. There was a long-standing feud with the merchants of Waterford, which eventually started to take a toll on the O'Driscoll power base. The Battle of Kinsale in 1601 saw their fortunes further decline. Their castles were abandoned and became ruins. The O'Driscoll diaspora is worldwide, with members of the clan still rooted in great numbers throughout West Cork. Every year, in June, there is a gathering of the O'Driscoll clan in Baltimore. To finish off this segment, Dr. Emma Nicorrig has kindly offered to give some background to a famous lament for a young girl who was descended from both the Power or Puer families and O'Driscolls.
There are quite a few references to Baltimore in 18th century Irish poetry, where it was referred to by its Irish name, Dún na Siad. Dún na Siad can be translated as the fort or the stronghold of the treasures, or the fort or the stronghold of the pathways. In early medieval and early modern Irish, Siads could mean either or. So we're not entirely sure which is at the back of this place name. And this stronghold is still in the village today. It was associated with the Driscolls at the time of the sack of Baltimore. It is still associated with the Driscolls, and in fact there are many Driscoll families in the locality to this very day. And in a moment I want to read to you an extract from a poem composed by an 18th century Irish poet, a very well-known Cork poet who was associated with a famous Cork circle of scholars and poets. His name was Owen an Mhéirín Macortha, and this poem is a lament. It is a lament for a girl who died before her time, a young girl whose name was Deireann Puer, and she died in Clonmult, or in Clúin-Mult, in 1736. And in this particular poem, he refers to her parents, but he doesn't refer to them overtly, he refers to them indirectly. He refers to Doireann herself as being a combination of two bloodlines, and he describes the blood that combined and was refined in the figure of Doireann in this poem. He refers to these streams of blood as being pure, strong, fragrant, rage-filled, and that this blood mixed to create this pleasant, gentle, beautiful, lovely girl. He refers to the famous blood of the fierce hounds of Baltimore. And in this, he's referring to the O'Driscolls, her mother's people, her mother having come from Baltimore itself. Dá molamh mé befoscantach úl gach léin, de bholthingses níor jocarghomh a glú sa dhéim. Teirechas mná cribhine lucht lú na nécht, lear cosnavach chormach gurt úgane éil. Is srahabh crystal dolamh cothig cúra tréan, de fuilcach bríngheal hethibh holtfar bhuí na gréibh. Treabh horan tropach chosantach gan smút na bair, is fuil dhearc na morab chun ó dhún na séad.